I'll start with a short self-introduction. My name is Celia Chambers. I also did the junior high school information video. I'll just introduce myself again. I am living and working in Takeo City right now. I'm an American jet from Wisconsin. It's my second year. And even though I've only been living in Saga for 1 year, I have experienced at this point 3 pretty big natural disasters in my town. So yes, that takes us into our topic right now. Disaster and emergency prevention, which I know is not like the most interesting topic, but it is pretty vital information, so try to pay attention and take note of the important takeaways. So I'm not sure how much experience you are going to have with Japan or how much knowledge you're going to have about natural disasters in Japan. You should know that Japan is a really safe place to live in terms of crime. It has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. So while you're not very likely to be robbed in the street, it is pretty dangerous in terms of natural disasters. Japan has tons and tons of natural disasters, and that is due to the tropical climate and the topography. So Japan is very near and on top of several different fault lines, and so that means that Japan has, in particular, a ton of earthquakes and sometimes tsunamis that will accompany an earthquake or a shift in the fault line. Yes, so like I said, earthquakes, there are many fault lines that Japan is close to. There are also 83 active volcanoes all over Japan, and there are 9 in Kyushu. None in Saga, I don't think, though. Tsunamis happen sometimes. They accompany the bigger earthquakes. There are also typhoons, which, if you're not aware, a hurricane and a typhoon are the same exact thing. They're just called typhoons here in Japan. So this is a big tropical storm. What you will experience when you experience a typhoon, if you do, is very, very strong winds, flying debris, flooding, and landslides sometimes. And then nuclear disasters have also happened in Japan. Yes, all right, so let's get into these a little bit more. And how about Saga? So Saga, I was told before I moved to Saga that Saga was the safest prefecture in Japan in terms of natural disasters. While that is true, we do experience our fair share of them, especially heavy rains and flooding, which I will get into. There are minor earthquake impacts from surrounding prefectures. So in my time here, my 1 year here, I've only felt a couple earthquakes, and they've been very low level, just very minimal shaking, nothing falling off shelves or anything like that. So really earthquakes you don't have to worry about too much. There is a minor risk of nuclear contamination because we have a nuclear power plant in Genkai, but highlight on minor. It's a very safe nuclear power plant, so again, nothing to worry about there. Like I said before, the most common disaster is definitely heavy rain and flooding. And after heavy rain happens, something that you need to be aware of is landslides that happen from rain erosion and soil loosening. Yes, so I came to Takeo in August last year, so August 2019. And I was in Takeo for 2 weeks when our city and prefecture was hit by pretty devastating heavy rain and flooding. Takeo especially was hit really, really badly. Many areas in town were very heavily flooded, and tons of people had to evacuate their homes. Many houses were destroyed as well. So the city is actually still recovering from this heavy rain that happened in August of last year. Luckily, my apartment was in a area of high elevation in the city, so my apartment and I was completely safe from the flooding. However, Amy Yin, who came into Takeo at the same time as me, maybe you will meet her later, she wasn't so lucky. Her apartment was in one of the areas of Takeo that experienced the worst flooding. So this picture is the view outside of her apartment on the first morning of the bad flooding. So her apartment is on the 2nd floor, so she's standing on the balcony of her 2nd floor apartment and looking out. Here is the parking lot of her apartment, and this area right here, which is now covered in water, that is actually a rice field, but the water level has risen up, so you can't see the rice anymore. This is a progress pic. The water has now risen up to the parking lot level, and the cars are covered up to the tires. So that red car is Amy's car. And this is one of the last pics that she sent me from that day. So the red car again is her car. Unfortunately, her car did not survive this experience. She had to buy a new one. And no, her insurance did not cover flood disasters. So she had to buy a new car. That was pretty hard for her. Luckily, Amy was completely safe, and so was her apartment. Her apartment was on the second floor, which saved her. She had to be evacuated from her apartment building by boat, and then she spent the night at a temple, which was turned into an evacuation center. So I hope that by sharing this story, I can convey that this could happen to you. It probably won't, but you could experience a natural disaster in your time here. You almost certainly will, but maybe not to this extent, not one this bad, hopefully. Yes, so this is Amy. Maybe you've met her before. She got interviewed by the local newspaper, and this is her holding up her hand to show how high the water level was at her apartment complex. These are the boats that were used to evacuate residents. Yes, so these are vocabulary words in Japanese associated with disasters and disaster prevention. There is evacuation area, hinanbasho or hinanjo, flooding, kozui, earthquake is jishin, fire is kaji, disaster prevention is bolsai, landslide is doshakuzure, heavy rain is oame. I think you're going to hear this one a lot. Typhoon is just typhoon, so that one's pretty easy. And then practice or drill, that can be disaster related or for another purpose, is kunnan. I'm not saying that you have to memorize all of these at all, but maybe be familiar with, for example, if you hear that there's a big typhoon coming up, maybe you can make an effort to try and learn some of the words associated with typhoon. Okay, so moving on to volcanoes. Like I said, there are a few active volcanoes on Kyushu. The closest highly active ones are Sakurajima, the really famous one in Kagoshima, right down at the south of Kyushu. There's also Mount Aso in Kumamoto and Mount Unzen in Nagasaki. So this is particularly relevant when you're planning travel to these prefectures. Before you travel, you should really check the volcanic activity before you go there. Not necessarily because it might be dangerous to you, but because it can close off things like ropeways up the mountain or hiking trails and stuff. So it can just make your trip less fun if you're not aware that there's been an eruption recently and you can't even go to the mountain that you wanted to go to. If in the unfortunate event that you are near a volcano when it erupts, be aware of ash eruptions, cover your mouth, your nose, and your skin if possible. Avoid driving and seek cover. Just some general trip tips that I think are really helpful. So number one, check for weather reports, volcano and earthquake warnings, and corona infection numbers before you travel. Yes, so even if your prefecture is not experiencing something like heavy rain or a volcano eruption or an earthquake, maybe the prefecture that you're going to is, and that can really impact things like public transportation or like tourist destinations, whether they're open or closed. So that's something to check on before you go. Corona infection numbers, that one is particularly important because of the nature of our jobs. So me, I work with well over 1,000 students. So if I were to get corona, I would be what they call a super spreader, and I think you would too. All ALTs would be super spreaders. So if I got corona, I would shut down like my entire town because I'm in contact with so many kids. So that's why it's really essential for us to be careful and not bring corona back to our cities. Like I said before, transportation. So public transportation like trains and buses and also roads can be affected by natural disasters. So you could get stuck somewhere and not be able to make it back to Saga for work on Monday morning if, for example, there's rain that stops a train or something. So something else to be aware of. And also, my last and probably most important tip that I want to share is when you're traveling, especially if you are traveling solo, please let somebody know where you are going. And if you can, give them a general itinerary. So if something happens, they'll know where you are supposed to be or the last place that you were at. Typhoon season. So typhoon season is between May and October, so that's a really long time. We are still in typhoon season here. Typhoons are predicted early and they're followed pretty closely in detail by the Japanese weather reports. So if a big one is coming, you're likely going to know about it a week or so in advance, and all of your coworkers will be talking about it. People will tell you about it, so you probably won't be caught completely unawares. A typhoon is not just a storm. A typhoon is a hurricane, so it's a really, really huge storm. Typhoons involve violent winds and heavy rain, and they can lead to flooding and landslides. So in the more severe ones, it's really safer to just stay inside. Don't go outside where flying debris could hit you and injure you. It also significantly impacts public transportation. But your schools might not necessarily be closed, so you should contact your supervisor to find out if you still have school. And again, make use of your JET network. So maybe if you don't know what's going on, your JET friends will, so make sure to contact them. Landslides. So landslides, there's a big danger of landslides happening after heavy rain because the rain soaks into the soil and it loosens the soil. So yes, landslides can and will happen. They are especially prevalent around areas where there are cliffs or mountains, so a lot of saga. They also happen very suddenly and they're really difficult to predict. So you gotta be careful when you're driving around. Maybe something to reconsider is driving in mountainous areas during heavy rain or after heavy rain. Maybe choose a route with a more open road. Again, roads may be closed because of landslides. Yes, so when there is a heavy rain warning that is put out by your city hall, you should hear evacuation sirens going off if the heavy rain level is high enough. So you should hear the evacuation sirens, and then you should also receive a little warning on your phone. If there is an evacuation warning, you shouldn't be driving. Don't risk it. Water can damage your car, as happened with Amy. So yeah, be careful with your car, and also do not try to swim through flood water. It's really unsafe, really unhygienic. It can make you sick, and there can be dangerous debris floating in it as well, so don't try to swim through flood water. Another thing you can do is if you are worried about water getting shut off to your apartment or home, is you can fill up your bathtub with water. Those things can hold quite a bit, so that can really come in handy. Also, another thing that's really key is to be aware of your home's relative location. So if you live in a low area or close to a river or cliffs, you should really consider evacuating to higher ground if you know that there's going to be heavy rain or flooding or a typhoon. So usually schools and community centers are evacuation centers. So my friend Amy, who I shared pictures of her apartment and the flooding outside her apartment, she lives in a very low area of town, which is very susceptible to flooding. That area of town has been flooded at least 3 times this year. So now what she does is when we know that there is heavy rain predicted, is she goes and she takes her car and she spends the night at either my house or another JET in the area's house. So yeah, you can do that, or you can take shelter at an official evacuation center. Yes, but precautions are good. Yeah, so these are the different warning levels for heavy rain. 5 is the worst. 5 is really bad, disaster level. 4 is when they start to issue evacuation orders and advisories. 3 is kind of where they're just telling you to get ready in case you are ordered to evacuate. 2 and 1 are less severe. But yes, so 5 is the most severe, just remember that. Yeah, something that's really key that you should find out as soon as possible is where the nearest evacuation center to your home is. Do you know where the nearest evacuation center to your home is? If you don't, then I recommend that right now you message your supervisor and ask them where it is. It's something you really should know. Number 2, I think that you should practice walking to this evacuation center at least one time so you know how to get there on foot. If something bad happens, if it starts raining really heavily and floodwaters rise up above the roads, it might be really hard to tell where you're going. So having that experience of having walked to your evacuation center at least once can help you keep a level head and know where you're going should something bad happen. And again, if something bad happens, there are a few people that you should contact immediately. Your supervisor, definitely, and your JET network within your city or your district. Yes, so this is very important for your safety, so I really strongly recommend that you do these things. Your emergency pack. I think that everybody in their apartment should have some form of emergency pack or emergency supplies that they can take with them to an evacuation shelter if they need to, or just keep on hand in case something happens. So here are a few ideas of what can be in your emergency pack. So number 1, a change of clothes. Number 2, necessary medication. Number 3, a first aid kit. It doesn't have to be super comprehensive. It can just be as simple as bandages and antiseptic, and Band-Aids. Number 4, bottled water. That's really important. Number 5, non-perishable food, such as ramen or canned goods. And number 6, important documents. So your passport, your residence card, your social security card, your bank book, things like that. So originals or copies. And then lastly, I think a flashlight is always really good to have on hand. The Clear Safety Confirmation System. I think you should have received information about how to register for this at the JET official orientation, but if you haven't done so yet, you gotta do it. It's pretty easy once you log into the website. It's important because CLEAR connects us with our respective embassies, and so they can't always check to see if you're okay just through going through everybody's individual BOE. So that's why it's really important for you to make sure that this gets done. Earthquakes, okay. So earthquakes are one of the most prevalent disasters in Japan, although they don't happen as often in Saga. So you might experience them quite a bit more if you travel to other prefectures than Saga. So the reason that Saga does not experience too many is because it's not on a fault line. But when you are traveling around Kyushu, please check for earthquake news and warnings. There was quite a bad earthquake in 2016 in Kumamoto. Kumamoto is just a little bit south of Saga, so pretty close. The earthquake happened over 4 years ago now, but it was so severe that the city is still recovering. They're still rebuilding. So they do happen on Kyushu, and it's something you need to be conscientious of. Earthquakes are rated on a scale of 0 to 7. So 7 is the worst. 7 is really, really bad. If a severe earthquake happens, it can lead to damaged roads and other infrastructure. So maybe you already know what to do if an earthquake happens, but if not, this is the general procedure. What you should really, really make an effort to do is to avoid anything that can fall on you from above. So this could be items from shelves, air conditioning units, light fixtures, even furniture like wardrobes or cabinets that could be shook loose in the tremors from the earthquake. You should try to take cover underneath something like a table or a desk. Get down on your hands and knees and crawl underneath a table or a desk. And don't move until the tremors have completely stopped. You can try to prop open a door or window to secure the exit for escape from wherever you are, if it's your apartment or an office building, because sometimes the tremors from the earthquake can damage the wall around your exit path, so your window or your door. So propping open a way to get out is pretty important. Another thing is to stay away from your gas stove. Gas will, in most cases, automatically stop when there is seismic activity, but after you wait for the tremors to stop, try to close the main gas valve after you confirm the stability of your stove. And this last one is pretty obvious. Don't use any elevators during or after an earthquake. Use the stairs. Different ways to keep informed. So I'd say number 1 in terms of how useful it is the Japan Meteorological Agency website. They have services in Japanese, English, and many other languages, so that is really helpful. Number 2 is your own city's official website. Obviously, how a natural disaster affects you is going to be really dependent on where you live. So for example, in Takeo, the City Hall actually has a Facebook page that they use, and they post all their updates for natural disasters, including the heavy rain that we experienced, on Facebook. So that's where I got all of my information from, including maps of which parts of town were flooded, which roads were out of commission, that kind of thing. Next would be Spira. I think that you should follow their Facebook page. They have a lot of very useful things that they put out on their Facebook page, including prefectural disaster warnings with English translations. They also have multilingual helplines that you can call if you need to. There are so many different apps that you can use to send you alerts when there are natural disasters happening in your area. One that has come recommended is the Yahoo Disaster Alert app. It's in Japanese, but it uses images to represent the different types of disasters, and it's pretty easy to understand. It also shows evacuation areas. You don't have to use this one, but you can choose whichever one you like. Nuclear disasters. So Saga does have a nuclear power plant in Genkai, in Karatsu. After the Fukushima disaster, that was in 2011, when there was the big earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear meltdown in Fukushima Prefecture. All the units all across the country and in Genkai were shut down and tested for safety. So there are two that are currently in operation. So if you are placed in the Karatsu area, you might have nuclear disaster drills in school. But anyways, like I said, the units have all been extensively tested for safety. So even small problems result in complete shutdowns. So it's nothing that you need to worry about. Winter worries. Maybe you come from somewhere that's really hot all year round and you've never experienced a cold winter before. You don't have to worry about the more extreme aspects of winter. It doesn't really snow very often here at all. So probably no snow days, unfortunately. School is not usually canceled. However, you might have ice forming on the windshield of your car if you choose to drive. So if you haven't dealt with this before, where I'm from in the Midwest in the US, people usually scrape the ice off their cars with ice scrapers. Ice scrapers are hard to find here, but I think that the best method for melting the ice off of your windshield is to just start your car and let the engine heat up the window and melt the ice off. Japanese people sometimes pour boiling water on their windshields. I think that's really dangerous, as the change in temperature can shatter glass sometimes, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. Yes, roads may be frozen as well, so be careful, especially in mountainous areas and over bridges. Public transportation could be safer in some cases. The last thing that I will leave you with are emergency contacts. These two numbers you should definitely memorize. 119 for ambulance or fire services, and 110 for the police. So put these numbers in your phone and also memorize them. They're really short. If an emergency happens, you should call your BOE or your contracting organization. And I recommend that you keep emergency contact info and addresses on you and in your wallet. Okay, all right, thank you for bearing with me. And remember that even if you're likely to experience one of these natural disasters, probably you won't experience it on a really severe level, and hopefully you'll be prepared for it. Thank you.